Hi everyone, my name is Abhiraj Garikapati. Welcome to my YouTube channel Amazing Abhi.
Don't just hear the story, enter it.
Before descending, he thanked Michelin for guiding them this far, and told him that he was free to leave if he wished. To Guillaume's surprise, Michelin refused. He said that his heart had not raced like this in centuries, and he wanted to remain by their side until the very end. Even if he were to die afterward, he would have no regrets. Guillaume could only shake his head and joke that Michelin had a rather dark sense of humor. Turning serious once more, Guillaume gathered Abel and Schill before the staircase to explain the plan. Drudger's army would continue growing stronger the longer the battle dragged on, so they needed to defeat it as quickly as possible. Abel and Schill would focus on holding back the endless waves of undead, while Guillaume would deal with Drudger directly. He then turned toward Michelin to assign him a role as well, but before he could speak, Michelin cheerfully declared that he would serve as their coach and cheer them on from behind. Guillaume told him to keep an eye out for them. He then led once again, telling everyone it was time to move. Soon, the group began descending the long staircase. Schill held up a torch while Michelin guided them through the darkness. The stairs seemed to stretch endlessly downward, with no sign of where they would eventually lead. As they continued their descent, Guillaume glanced at Michelin and found himself thinking that, in some ways, the undead man was almost more unsettling than the enemies waiting ahead. Even so, Michelin had been incredibly helpful. Despite the pitch-black surroundings, he guided them without hesitation, as though he had walked this path countless times before. Eventually, the stairs came to an end. Michelin suddenly stopped and quietly announced that they had finally reached the place beyond the darkness. Noticing the change in his expression, Guillaume immediately asked what was wrong. Michelin slowly turned toward the group and explained that undead could roughly sense each other's souls. Guillaume looked puzzled, so Michelin elaborated. As the inscription had implied, the souls of the undead did not disappear even after their bodies were destroyed. Earlier in the dungeon, the number of lingering souls had been relatively small. Throughout his centuries there, Michelin had sensed only around 20 of them at any given time, but this place was completely different. The souls gathered here were so numerous that many had even taken physical form. When Guillaume asked how many he was talking about, Michelin answered with a frightened expression. There were easily more than 10,000. At that moment, a bright light suddenly illuminated the chamber before them. The group finally saw the true layout of the underground hall. They were standing on the path leading toward a massive central platform, while both sides of the pathway were packed with countless undead. The endless horde stretched as far as the eye could see, with many of them desperately trying to climb toward the narrow walkway where the group stood. Guillaume immediately ordered everyone to get ready. Looking over the overwhelming army, he could not help thinking that Michelin's estimate had not been an exaggeration. There really were more than 10,000 undead gathered in this place. Then, an even greater pressure spread across the chamber. Michelin pointed toward the center of the platform. There, surrounded by a dark aura and faint light, stood a stone throne. Seated upon it was a lone figure wearing a crown, with a sword resting beside him. The moment they saw him, Abel quietly realized that this had to be the S-ranked demonic beast. Guillaume instantly recognized him as well. The overwhelming presence before them belonged to none other than Drudger, the Lich King. Even Guillaume could feel the immense pressure radiating from the figure. A moment later, the figure slowly rose from the throne. His crown slipped to the ground as he stood and picked up the sword, resting at his side. His long cape fluttered behind him, but something immediately felt wrong to Guillaume. He had expected Drudger to wield the Reaper's staff, not a sword. Before he could make sense of it, he sensed Abel's reaction beside him. Turning his head, he saw her staring at the figure with wide eyes. Her lips trembled as if she wanted to say something, yet no words came out. Guillaume immediately looked back at the figure. At that exact moment, the hood covering the man's face slowly fell away, revealing his hair, and finally his face. The person standing before them was none other than Abel's father. This shit is peak. Abel stood frozen in place, staring at the figure before her. In a trembling voice, she called out to her father. Beside her, Schill was equally shocked, instinctively calling him by his name Orion. Meanwhile, the man who now ruled the dungeon as its boss, Drudger, silently looked down at them from his throne. Watching the scene unfold, Jiome immediately realized that everything had gone in the worst possible direction. He had assumed this Drager would be different from the one he knew, but the truth was far cooler. Abel's father himself had become Drager. Jiome glanced at Abel, who remained completely overwhelmed by the revelation. A wave of regret crossed his mind. If he had known this beforehand, he would have found some way to stop Abel and Shyle from coming here. Right now, neither of them was in any condition to fight. Both were trapped in shock, unable to process what they were seeing. At that moment, Jiome remembered Shile's warning before they entered the sealed chamber. If he judged the situation to be too dangerous, he was supposed to retreat immediately. For a brief moment, he considered pulling everyone out of the dungeon. However, another memory surfaced almost immediately. He remembered Abel thanking him over lunch for agreeing to join this dungeon raid. The determination in her eyes back then made him hesitate. Before anyone could gather themselves, Michelin urgently called out to the group, telling everyone to regain their composure. This was not the time to freeze in place. But before they could react, the entire chamber suddenly began to tremble. Michelin immediately turned toward the throne, realizing where the violent shaking was coming from. At the same moment, Drager raised his sword and unleashed two massive slashes from where he stood. The attacks tore through the enormous pathway with overwhelming force. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Splitting the stone bridge apart and instantly separating the group into 3 different sections. Cracks rapidly spread beneath Jiome's feet before the ground finally gave way. The platform collapsed, sending Jiome crashing downward toward the countless undead gathered below. As he fell, he instinctively turned toward Abel and shouted her name. While he was surrounded by an endless horde of undead, the scene shifted to Abel's childhood. Back then, she stood at the front door with tears streaming down her face, throwing a tantrum because her parents were leaving on another mission. Her father gently assured her that they would return soon, but the young Abel refused to believe him. She called him a liar and cried that she would be left alone again. Her mother immediately scolded her for speaking that way, but her father simply smiled. Kneeling in front of her, he held out his little finger and made her a promise. When he came home, the two of them would practice swordsmanship together. It was their promise. Still sniffling, the little girl hooked her pinky around his and tearfully told him that he had to come back soon. Her parents smiled before walking out the door, which slowly closed behind them. Time quietly passed, and rumors eventually spread throughout the mansion that the heroic couple had gone missing. The servants fell into panic, but Abel continued waiting faithfully for the day her parents would return. 1 year passed, and she was still standing in front of that same door. 3 years passed, yet she continued waiting. 6 years later, Siegfried finally told her to stop waiting and pick up a sword instead. Then, before she even realized it, 10 long years had gone by. The door had never opened again, and neither of her parents had ever returned. At last, Abel turned away from the entrance with determination in her eyes. She decided she would wait no longer. She would find them herself. Back in the present, Abel tightened her grip on her sword as countless undead charged toward her. The first wave completely surrounded her, but she sliced through every one of them and burst straight out of the encirclement. Without slowing down, she sprinted directly toward Drager. Every undead that blocked her path was cut down without hesitation. More and more enemies threw themselves in front of her, yet she continued carving a path forward, refusing to let anyone stop her. At the same time, Jiome was fighting through the horde on his own side of the battlefield. Between strikes, he glanced toward the throne and immediately noticed Abel charging straight toward her father. Abel's eyes never left Orion as she ran. The only thing she could think about was reaching her father. Deep within her heart, it felt as though the little girl from 10 years ago was still crying as she ran toward him with open arms. But the figure waiting for her was no longer her father. It was Drager. Without the slightest hesitation, the undead king calmly raised his sword to strike her down. At the last second, a shadow suddenly leaped between them. Abel instinctively jumped backward as Drager's sword descended. The mysterious figure was instantly cut cleanly in half. As the body collapsed to the ground, a familiar pendant slipped free and landed beside it. Abel stared at it in confusion, unable to understand what had just happened. She pushed past the fallen corpse and desperately called out to her father once more. Drager answered only by raising his sword again, dark aura gathering around its blade. Tears streamed down Abel's face as she cried out, asking why. Just as Drager's sword came crashing down, another slash burst across the battlefield. Geoma appeared between Abel and the attack, intercepting the blow and cutting Drager's blade aside. Standing protectively in front of Abel, he glared at the undead king with overwhelming killing intent. At the same time, Shiel rushed over and quickly checked whether Abel had been injured. Abel, however, barely heard her. Before we move ahead, please take a second to share on this video. Sharing helps this video reach friends who may also enjoy anime, gaming, travel, cricket, chess, career basics, or personal stories. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Through her tears, she desperately asked Shiel if that really wasn't her father anymore. Shiel could only clench her teeth in silence. Unable to answer, Geoma suddenly shouted for Abel to pull herself together. He reminded her that deep down, she already knew the truth. Her father was trapped by the same terrible curse described in the inscription. If that was the case, then there was still something they could do. They could save him. Those words immediately reached Abel. She recalled the inscription's plea, hoping that one day someone would appear to break the curse and free the dead from their shackles. Wiping away her tears, she turned toward Geoma and told him to stick to their original plan. She and Shiel would hold back the undead somehow, but she begged him to save her father. Without even turning around, Geoma calmly replied that she could leave it to him. Meanwhile, Drager restored his damaged blade with dark aura. Geoma tightened his grip on both knives and activated the blessing of the sword god, along with the blessing of pennilessness. Lightning-like energy surged across his body as the system window appeared before him. It announced that the blessing of pennilessness had evolved after meeting its activation requirement, increasing its duration from 50 seconds to 60 seconds. 45 seconds still remained. Fixing his eyes on the monarch who ruled over death, Drager, Geoma lowered his stance before launching himself forward at full speed. This time, he had only one objective: to cut down the king of the dead. Geoma charged toward Drager at full speed, cutting down every undead that dared block his path. His eyes remained locked on the undead king as a single thought echoed through his mind. It did not matter whether his opponent was called the Lord of the Dead or anything else. If his blade could reach him, then Drager would fall. With that conviction, Geoma leaped high into the air and swung his blade once again. Meanwhile, Michelin had taken cover behind a broken wall, nervously peeking outside. Being left alone made him far more frightened than facing the battle itself, and he wondered where everyone else had gone. Suddenly, a rotten hand burst out of the ground and grabbed his leg. Before the undead could pull him down, several projectiles shot through the air and struck it instantly. Shiel enabled rushed over and quickly pulled Michelin behind them. Shiel warned him to stay behind them while she noticed more undead pouring in from the entrance. Abel immediately understood the situation. Since the enemies were funneling through a single route, all they had to do was hold that position. Michelin worried that they should regroup with Geoma first, but Shiel confidently reassured him. Abel calmly added that everything was still going according to plan. Even Michelin found himself impressed, as expected of the people who had come to save them. However, before anyone could relax, a figure suddenly came flying across the battlefield. It was Geoma, who had been blasted backward by one of Drager's attacks. Abel and Shiel gasped in shock as he crashed into their area. At the same moment, countless undead charged toward him from every direction. But before they could even reach him, Geoma unleashed a single slash that instantly cut through the entire horde. Abel, Shiel, and Michelin could only stare silently at the overwhelming display of power. With 36 seconds remained for his blessing to worn out, he dashed toward Drager. He knew that if he relaxed for even a second, Drager would force him back once more. He had to end the fight before his blessing expired. Through the blessing of the sword god, Geoma could clearly see 3 glowing red lines across Drager's body, revealing the precise points where he could strike. Just then, Drager lowered his sword and summoned another enormous wave of undead. Geoma ignored the army and charged straight ahead. Every movement was calculated around those invisible weak points. He zigzagged through the horde at incredible speed, cutting down countless undead in an instant. Even then, more monsters immediately replaced the ones he had just defeated. Geoma quickly realized that their numbers were multiplying far too rapidly. If he continued eliminating them one by one, he would never reach Drager. Changing his grip on his blade, Geomad decided to rely on aura instead. He sprinted forward once more before leaping into the air and gathering immense aura around his weapon. With a powerful vertical strike, he unleashed a massive aura slash that split through the entire horde from top to bottom. More undead immediately appeared to replace the fallen ones, but Geoma answered with yet another aura slash, erasing them in a single attack. Watching the destruction unfold before her eyes, Shyle was left speechless by the sheer power Geomad displayed. Meanwhile, Michelin could barely believe what he was seeing. Someone so young was already capable of wielding aura. He wondered what had happened during the 700 years he had been trapped inside this dungeon. As he continued watching Geomad fight, the young man's black hair and black eyes stirred an old memory deep within Michelin's mind. For some reason, Geomad's appearance felt strangely familiar. With only 21 seconds remaining. Before we move ahead, please take a second to like on this video. A like tells me that you enjoyed this topic. Your support helps Amazing Abhai grow naturally. Geomad charged toward Drager once again. Suddenly, a projectile came flying straight at him. He reacted instantly, deflecting it with his blade before it could hit. Looking ahead, he realized Drager had fired the slash from his own sword. Geomad couldn't help thinking that the attack almost felt like the undead king was showing off his swordsmanship. Considering he had once been the Sword Emperor's son, perhaps it wasn't surprising after all. At the same time, a massive vortex of dark energy rushed toward Abel's group. Seeing Michelin directly in its path, Abel immediately leaped in front of him and cut through the incoming attack, protecting him. However, that left an opening for an undead lurking nearby to strike her from behind. Before it could land the attack, Shyle fired several projectiles that instantly took it down, giving Abel enough time to finish it off with a clean slash. But the impact finally proved too much for her weapon. Her sword cracked before snapping cleanly in half. The moment Shyle saw the broken blade, she realized the strain of the battle had finally caught up with Abel's weapon as well. Even so, Abel's first concern was Michelin. She calmly asked if he was all right, and Michelin nodded in relief. Michelin then remembered something the first sword saint had once told him. During moments of hardship, a swordsman should remember the feeling of the sword in their hand to strengthen their resolve. As Abel listened to those words, another group of undead came charging toward them from the distance. Shyle immediately warned that the situation would only become more dangerous from there, and urged everyone to retreat toward a safer position. Before following, Abel briefly looked in Geomad's direction, silently placing all of her hope in him. Meanwhile, only 10 seconds remained on Geomad's blessing. After cutting through the endless horde, he finally closed the distance and came within a few meters of Druger. The undead king calmly raised his sword, while Geomad lowered his stance. Without the slightest hesitation, the instant they met, their blades collided with overwhelming force, sending violent shockwaves across the battlefield. Without missing a beat, Geomad drew his second knife and slashed off Drager's arm. Even after losing the limb, Drager immediately counterattacked. Catching the airborne sword with his remaining hand, he unleashed a massive vertical slash. Geomad effortlessly ducked beneath it, before slipping behind his opponent. In the next instant, his blade cleanly severed Drager's head. A violent explosion of dark energy erupted around the undead king. Geoma watched as the severed head slowly reattached itself to the body. Even after cutting him down, Drager regenerated almost instantly. Realizing ordinary attacks would never be enough, Geoma concluded that there had to be another way to kill him. But with so little time remaining, he couldn't afford to stop and think. He would simply continue cutting Drager down until he found the answer. As Drager's head completely regenerated, a mysterious red light suddenly began glowing from his chest. Geomad's attention was instantly drawn toward it. The two rushed at each other once again, and another clash shook the battlefield. Their attacks crossed as they passed by one another. Both fighters came to a stop with their backs turned. As Geomad slowly looked behind him, his eyes remained fixed on that glowing light. He finally understood what he had been seeing all along. Embedded deep within Drager's chest was the Reaper's staff itself. At its center rested the gemstone of Undying, the true source of the curse that had trapped every soul inside the dungeon. Without another word, Geomad let one of his knives fall to the ground and tightened his grip on the remaining blade. Across from him, Drager also lowered his stance, preparing for one final strike. Only 2 seconds remained on his blessings. Geoma exploded forward at his absolute maximum speed, while Roger gathered all of his power into a single attack. Yet, as the red light within his chest continued to glow, something deep inside the undead king began to stir. His heart started pounding once more, and a forgotten memory echoed through his fading consciousness. The dead longed to be freed from the chains of immortality by the scent of the sword. Once, he had believed he was the saint of the sword. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to Amazing Up High. Subscribing makes sure you do not miss the next video, and it gives me motivation to keep improving the quality of every upload. Thank you for being here, and I will see you in the next one.